I raised that boy with everything I had, and now he can't spare me a room. That was the thought that echoed in my head long after I hung up the phone. My hands were still trembling, fingertips pressed against the receiver, as if holding on could change what I'd just heard. The call had started with so much hope. My doctor had gently told me that living alone after my fall wasn't wise. I'd practiced for hours what I would say to Nathan. I wanted to sound calm, not desperate. I wanted to be his mother, not his burden. When he picked up, I smiled instinctively. "Nathan, sweetheart," I said, my voice lighter than it felt, but something in his tone stopped me cold, that distant politeness people use with strangers. "Mom, I can't right now," he said flatly. "Things are complicated. I'm really busy with work." I swallowed hard. "It's only temporary," I whispered, "just until I feel steadier." A pause. Then his words landed like stones. "I'm not ready to take that on, Mom. You'll figure something out." Take that on, like I was an assignment, a problem to be solved. I didn't argue. I thanked him for picking up, said I understood, even managed a small laugh. Then I placed the phone back on its cradle and stared at it as if it might ring again with an apology. It didn't. The silence was deafening. Outside, the late afternoon sun sank behind the oaks, stretching shadows across the living room. I sat at the kitchen table, still holding the list of things I'd planned to pack: my favorite teapot, his father's photo, the knitted blanket he'd loved as a boy. Now they all felt like relics from a world that no longer wanted me in it. I told myself he must have his reasons, maybe stress, maybe something I didn't know. But no matter how I tried to reason it away, the truth kept pressing against my chest. My son, the boy I raised with every ounce of love I had closed his door on me. And yet, somewhere in that ache, a part of me refused to give up. I'd survived loneliness before. I'd survived this, too. Still, that night, the quiet house felt heavier than ever, every clock tick a reminder that I was truly alone. But the world has a way of stirring ghosts when you least expect it. I still cooked dinner for two. Habit, I suppose. 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 glasses of water. The motions soothed me. Chop, stir, taste, serve. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and butter, the kind of meal Nathan always loved when he was small. I remembered his little hands tugging at my sleeve, his eyes wide as he'd ask, "Is it ready yet, Mom?" I used to tell him, "Good things take time, honey." I smiled at the memory, though it burned on the way out. When the meal was done, I sat alone at the table, my eyes on the empty chair across from me. For a moment, I imagined him there, older now, tired from work but smiling anyway, telling me about his day. I almost reached for the second plate before I stopped myself. I couldn't eat much. Grief has a taste, and it's bitter. After washing the dishes, I wiped the counter and noticed a small stack of unopened mail, bills, advertisements, and then one envelope that froze me. The handwriting was unmistakable. Nathan's. My name wasn't on it, but the address was mine. He must have used my address for something before he moved out years ago. I hadn't seen his handwriting since. My heart thudded as I traced the letters with my thumb. Neat, careful, just like when he was a boy learning cursive at the kitchen table. I turned it over, hesitant to open it. The return address was faint, almost smudged, a name I didn't recognize. It wasn't mine to open, but something about it felt wrong. Why would Nathan have mail sent here after cutting himself off? I set it aside, telling myself to leave it be. But as I turned off the lights and headed to bed, the envelope seemed to glow in the dark, quiet, patient, waiting. Something in my gut whispered that my son's refusal wasn't just about me, and whatever he was hiding, it had just found its way back to my door. Martha showed up the next morning with her usual knock. 3 quick taps and 1 soft one. The rhythm of a woman who'd been my neighbor for 20 years. She didn't ask if she could come in. She never did. She carried a plate of her lemon bars, the ones that always seemed to make bad days feel survivable. "I heard about your fall," she said, settling into the chair across from me, "and Nathan not helping. That boy needs a talking to." I forced a smile. "He's busy, Martha. He's got his life." She stirred her tea with a clink, the sound sharp against the quiet. "We all had busy lives once. Didn't stop us from loving our mothers." Her words stung because they were true. I'd kept it all bottled up since the phone call. The shame, the confusion, the ache of being unwanted by the person you loved most. So when she asked what happened, I told her everything. How I'd called him, how he'd said no, how the silence afterward felt heavier than my own heartbeat. Martha listened without interruption. her eyes soft but piercing. When I finished, she leaned forward and said something that shifted the ground beneath me. Eleanor, maybe he's hiding something. People don't push away family without a reason. I wanted to protest, but the thought clung to me like fog. Hiding something. After she left, I sat by the window, watching her walk home across the street, her scarf flapping in the wind. I'd always believed in Nathan's goodness, even when he disappointed me. I told myself he was still the boy who once ran to me after every scraped knee. But Martha's words kept replaying. That evening, I went to the attic. Dust motes danced in the air as I opened the old trunk where Nathan's belongings still rested. His childhood books, his graduation cap, photos from a life that once felt whole. At the bottom, beneath yellowed papers, I found a photograph. Nathan stood beside a woman I didn't recognize. She was smiling, her hand in his, their closeness unmistakable. They looked comfortable, intimate. There was a woman in that photo, and she was holding Nathan's hand. I sat there for a long time, staring at that frozen moment. My heart beat faster, not from jealousy, but fear. Who was she? Why had he never mentioned her? Something inside me whispered. The story I thought I knew about my son was about to change. A week later, the house phone rang while I was folding laundry. I answered, but the line went silent. A click, then a muffled voice played from my answering machine. I didn't recognize it. Male, low, urgent. Tell Nathan the clinic called, and make sure she doesn't find out. He promised. Remember. The message ended with static. My name hadn't been spoken, but I knew. The way he said she felt personal, deliberate, like I was the secret. I replayed it 3 times, each word sinking deeper. The clinic. What clinic? What was Nathan promising to keep from me? My first instinct was to call him, to demand an explanation, but something inside stopped me. The way he'd spoken during our last conversation, cold, detached, told me he wouldn't tell the truth, even if I asked. So I sat at the table with a notepad, the teacher in me returning after all these years. When confusion hit my students, I'd tell them, start with what you know. What I knew was simple. Nathan had lied about something. He'd hidden it well, and now the truth was brushing against the edges of my life, just enough to make me uneasy. I picked up the phone and dialed his number anyway, straight to voicemail. I almost hung up, but then I heard my own voice, quiet but steady. Nathan, it's Mom. Call me when you can. I didn't mention the message. I didn't say the word clinic. I just waited, knowing silence sometimes tells you more than words ever can. When he didn't call back that night, or the next, I began piecing things together in my mind. The photo, the secretive tone, the message from a stranger. He was keeping something from me, and whatever it was, I wasn't going to be left in the dark, because just before I erased the voicemail, I heard it again, faint but unmistakable. The man's voice, saying my name. He said my name, and then he said, she can never find out. I didn't plan to see Nathan that day. I told myself I was just running an errand, dropping off the envelope that had been sitting on my table for a week. But the truth was, I needed to see him with my own eyes to know if the unease in my gut was real, or just the product of a lonely heart. His office sat on the top floor of a glass building downtown, the kind of place that smelled of money and disinfectant. The receptionist looked barely out of college, her smile too wide, her eyes too alert. When I told her I was Nathan's mother, she hesitated. Mrs. Turner, she said, fingers twitching on the keyboard. I didn't know you were coming. I handed her the envelope. It was sent to my address, by mistake. I thought he might need it. Her eyes darted toward the hallway. He's in a meeting. Maybe I can take it. Her tone was polite, but I could feel the tension beneath it. The way people sound when they're hiding something but don't want to lie outright. I don't mind waiting, I said. I took a seat in the lobby. That's when I saw them pamphlets, stacked neatly on the coffee table. Addiction recovery, family support programs, the path to healing. My brow furrowed. What were these doing in a tech company's lobby? Before I could think further, the elevator doors opened and there he was. My son. Nathan froze when he saw me. For a moment, I thought he might smile. Instead, panic flashed across his face, quick and unmistakable. Mom, what are you doing here? His voice cracked slightly. I brought something that was sent to my house. I held out the envelope, pretending calm. He took it but didn't open it. His hand trembled. You shouldn't have come, he said under his breath, eyes flicking to the receptionist, who suddenly found something very interesting on her screen. Why not? I asked softly. Are you in trouble, Nathan? He shook his head too fast, like a child caught in a lie. I'm busy, Mom. You can't just show up like this. The way he said can't instead of shouldn't, that told me more than any explanation could. I reached for his arm. You can tell me what's going on. He stepped back, eyes darkening. Please, Mom, just go. The words hit like a slap. He turned, walked briskly into his office, and closed the door. I stood there for a moment, my throat tight. The receptionist avoided my gaze. I left the building quietly, my heart hammering against my ribs. He looked at me like I was a ghost from a life he was trying to forget. And ghosts, I've learned, only appear when there's something left unburied. That night, I couldn't sleep. The memory of his trembling hand, his anxious eyes, the pamphlets, it all swirled together into a storm I couldn't silence. By morning, I knew I wouldn't find peace until I found the truth. I remembered the voicemail, the man who mentioned the clinic. That word had stuck with me, sharp as glass. So I listened again, carefully this time, and caught something I hadn't before. A faint background sound, the echo of a street name. 2 hours later, I was driving down that very street, a quiet road on the edge of town where the world felt smaller, almost forgotten. The sign out front read Haven Oaks Rehabilitation Center. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and disinfectant. The receptionist there smiled warmly. Can I help you? I cleared my throat. I'm looking for someone, Nathan Turner. I think he's connected to someone here. Her expression softened with recognition. Oh yes, he's been helping with the treatment payments. For Miss Laura Turner. The name hit me like thunder. Turner. My last name. I blinked. I'm sorry, who did you say? Laura Turner. She's been here a few months now. He's been very supportive. 1,000 thoughts crashed into each other. I tried to picture her, the woman in the photo, young, smiling, holding Nathan's hand. For a moment, jealousy twisted with confusion. My son had a secret woman, and he was paying for her recovery. But then the woman at the desk added, she's a sweet girl. Such a hard life she's had after losing her father. I felt the world tilt. My breath caught. Her father. Yes, she said gently. Mr. William Turner, right? That's what she told the intake staff. My husband's name. The hallway blurred. I steadied myself on the counter. William had been gone for years. The man I'd mourned. The man I'd trusted. The truth unfolded slowly, cruelly. Laura wasn't Nathan's lover. She was his sister, his father's other child. The woman in the photo wasn't his lover. She was his sister. I left the clinic in silence, the weight of decades pressing on my chest. Nathan hadn't rejected me out of cruelty. He'd been drowning in a secret that wasn't even his to keep. And now that I knew, I couldn't unsee the truth. The betrayal hadn't come from my son. It had been sleeping beside me all those years ago. The morning after my visit to Haven Oaks, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by the ghosts of my marriage. Every photograph of William now seemed like a riddle I'd failed to solve. The smile I once trusted looked different, thinner, uncertain. I began searching through the old oak chest at the foot of my bed, the one filled with decades of our shared life. His handwriting stared back at me from a small wooden box I didn't recognize. Inside were letters, yellowed, folded, heavy with dust. My hands shook as I opened the first. Eleanor, it began. I never meant for you to find out like this. Each page unraveled a truth I never imagined. He had fallen in love with another woman years ago. A brief affair he claimed had ended quietly. But one letter was different. It spoke of a child. Her name is Laura. I can't bear to tell Eleanor. She deserves better than my mistakes. I sat in silence, my heart breaking for a man who wasn't even here to answer for it. Grief layered itself over betrayal until I could barely breathe. The later letters turned more desperate, full of guilt and pleas for forgiveness that were never sent. He'd hidden them all, tucked away where only time could confess for him. At the bottom of the box lay a final note, written in Nathan's hand. Mom, I found these after Dad passed. I didn't know how to tell you. I wanted to protect you and her. It was then everything clicked into place. Nathan's distance, his secrecy, the way he'd flinched when I looked too closely. He wasn't avoiding me out of cruelty. He was carrying the weight of 2 families. I pressed the letters to my chest and wept. Not for the betrayal, but for all the years my son bore the burden alone. I wasn't the one Nathan couldn't forgive. It was himself. The light through the curtains caught the edges of the paper like a benediction. For the first time, I felt something shift. Not anger, not sorrow, but understanding. William's sins were done. It was time to save what remained. I arrived at Nathan's apartment that evening just as the city lights flickered on. My knock echoed through the hall. He opened the door, surprise and dread colliding on his face. Mom, he said softly, you shouldn't be here. I need to be. I stepped inside. The place was immaculate, too immaculate, everything arranged, nothing lived in. The air was thick with unspoken things. He avoided my eyes as he poured water into 2 glasses. His hands trembled. "Nathan," I began, my voice low, "I know about Laura." The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the counter. He froze. "How I found the letters," I said. "Your father's, and yours." For a long time, he didn't move. Then, quietly, he sank onto the couch. "I didn't want you to find out like that. I didn't want to hurt you again." I sat across from him. "You were a boy when you lost your father, and yet you carried his guilt as if it were yours." Tears welled in his eyes, stubbornly held back. "She had no one. Mom, Laura. She was just a kid. Dad helped her mother, but when he died, it all fell apart. I found her letters, the ones begging him for help. I couldn't ignore her, but I couldn't tell you either. I thought you'd hate him. Hate me." "I did," I whispered. "For a moment, I did. But now I see it wasn't hate, it was grief. You were trying to protect me from something that was already over." He buried his face in his hands. "I failed you." I moved to sit beside him. "No, you failed yourself by thinking you had to carry it alone." For a long while, neither of us spoke. The city's hum filled the silence. Then he looked up, his face streaked with tears. "I just wanted to make things right." "You did," I said, touching his cheek, "by loving when your father couldn't. But dam broke then." Nathan's shoulders shook, and I pulled him close. Years of distance dissolved between us like salt and water. For the first time, my son cried in my arms, not as a man, but as my boy again. I held him until the trembling stopped. The letters, the lies, the pain, all of it felt smaller in that moment, swallowed by something stronger. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a single act. It was a lifetime of choosing to love despite the scars. And as I looked at my son, this man shaped by secrets and sacrifice, I knew that love, finally, was winning. The first time I saw Laura, she was sitting in the garden behind Haven Oaks, sunlight falling across her shoulders like forgiveness itself. She looked up as Nathan and I approached, and for a moment, the air between us stilled, her eyes soft, uncertain, so much like William's met mine. I felt every muscle in my body tense, then release. "Mrs. Turner," she began, her voice trembling, "I don't expect you to want to see me. I raised my hand gently. Please, call me Eleanor." Nathan stood between us, like a bridge built from guilt and love. "Mom, Laura's been doing better." I thought it was time. I nodded. My voice wouldn't come yet, so I let silence speak. She looked fragile, thinner than the picture I'd seen, her eyes rimmed with the kind of sorrow that only long nights and too much truth can bring. "I'm sorry," she said finally, "for all of it, for what my mother did, for what it cost you. I didn't even know about you until after my father died." Her words weren't polished or rehearsed. They were real. I sat down beside her, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "None of that was your fault," I said softly. "The past belongs to the ones who created it. We just learn how to live with what's left." Her tears came quickly, and mine followed not long after. Nathan's hand rested on my shoulder, his thumb trembling as if holding the weight of 2 lives finally made sense. We talked for hours about William, about what we remembered, and what we wished we could forget. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was honest. When the nurse brought us lunch, a simple tray of soup and rolls, Laura laughed quietly. "It's nothing fancy," she said, "but it's better than most days." I smiled. "Then it's perfect." We ate together in the pale afternoon light, 3 broken souls piecing together something whole. When I left that day, I turned to look at them one last time. Nathan helping Laura to her chair, both of them smiling in that shy, hesitant way that means hope has just begun to grow roots. I walked into that clinic with 1 child, and left with 2. The months that followed were gentler than I expected. Nathan insisted I move in with them after Laura completed her program. "It's easier if we're all together," he said, "and I don't want you alone anymore." For once, I didn't argue. Their house was smaller than I imagined, but it breathed warmth. Laura kept flowers on every windowsill. Nathan, who once lived like a ghost, now hummed while he cooked in the mornings. I tended the small garden out back, the one spot Laura hadn't known what to do with. I showed her how to plant tomatoes, how to prune the dead leaves. She listened like a student eager for meaning. Sometimes she'd ask about her father, what he liked, what made him laugh. I told her about his favorite meal, chicken pot pie, the kind that filled the kitchen with buttery air. One Sunday, we made it together. Flour dusted the counter, Laughter spilled from the oven's hum. Nathan teased that we'd ruined his diet, and Laura threw a towel at him. It wasn't perfect. There were moments when silence crept in, when old pain brushed against new peace, but those moments passed like soft storms, leaving the air cleaner. At night, I'd sit by the window, watching the garden sway under the moonlight, and think about the strange grace of life, how something broken can still bloom. I had spent years believing love ended with betrayal, but now, watching Nathan and Laura laugh in the kitchen, I saw it differently. Love doesn't die when the truth hurts, it grows through it. When I looked at them, my son, my daughter, I saw the pieces of William that were worth remembering, his gentleness, his humor, the way he tried, even when he failed. We were three Turners, finally at peace with the ghosts that once divided us. And, as I brushed the soil from my hands one quiet evening, I whispered a prayer not of sorrow, but of gratitude. Some roots grow stronger after the storm. He thought he'd lost my love, but he was the reason I found my strength. That's how I began the letter. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the clock on the mantel, the same one that had marked every year of Nathan's life. Outside, the autumn wind brushed against the windows, carrying the smell of wet leaves and new beginnings. I wrote slowly, letting every word settle before the next one came. My dear Nathan, I began, there was a time when I thought silence was the same as distance. I thought your quiet meant you'd forgotten me, but I see now silence can also be love in disguise, a shield for the ones we're afraid to lose. I paused, my hand trembling slightly. I could still see his face the night he told me everything, his eyes wet, his voice raw with guilt. You taught me something, son, I continued, that love isn't measured by how close we stand, but by how deeply we care, even when it hurts. You carried secrets that weren't yours to bear, and yet, you still found a way to protect me. The pen scratched softly against the page, and for the first time in years, my heart didn't feel heavy. I forgive you, I wrote, for the words you didn't say, for the distance you thought I couldn't handle. You were wrong about one thing. I was never as fragile as you believed. The truth didn't break me, Nathan. It made me stronger. I leaned back in my chair, the light catching the edge of the paper. The living room glowed in gold tones, photographs of William, of Nathan, and now, Laura, our family, flawed but real. I thought about the garden outside, about the roots pressing quietly beneath the earth. So much had changed above the soil, yet they kept holding everything together. Thank you, I wrote next, for letting me meet Laura, for giving me another chance to love. She is a part of our story now, just as much as you are. Together, we are what remains of what was once broken, and that, my son, is enough. My eyes blurred, not from sorrow but from a fullness I hadn't felt in decades. At the bottom of the page, I signed, with love that never left you, Mom. I folded the letter and placed it on his nightstand, beside the photograph we'd taken at the garden. Then, with the quiet satisfaction that comes from completion, I opened my journal. The page waited, blank but inviting. I wrote one final line for myself. Family is not who stays perfect, it's who stays. As I closed the book, I felt the soft warmth of peace rise within me, not loud, not triumphant, but steady and true. And in that moment, I realized forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply lets you walk forward holding both love and truth in the same hand.